We're starting with scenarios because we know nothing is black and white in homeless. Everything is complicated and complex. And so Skip is going to take us through some scenarios. And Skip, you want to just facilitate this activity?
Hi, welcome back from lunch. And it's my job to keep you awake for the next speaker. Okay, if you would look in your packet and the, I believe it's salmon-colored paper, there are 5 scenarios, and it's very true that it can be very non-black and white when we're trying to determine whether or not somebody qualifies for McKinney-Vento benefits. A student qualifies for that. However, I will say that 95, 96, 97% of the time, it's not hard to figure out, but sometimes they are just hard to figure out, and that's when people pick up the phone and they call me or they call Lorraine, and sometimes, especially if you call me, then I go in and see Lorraine because Lorraine knows the answer. Well, actually, sometimes Lorraine calls the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, and we have a powwow about a question to see if somebody is eligible or not in their circumstances. So, so what I've done here on the salmon-colored piece of paper is I have written up 5 scenarios that we received since August in our office. Some of them are from this area of the state, and some of them for other areas of the state. But what I want to do is I want everybody to talk about the scenarios and then read the scenarios and then talk about the questions that are there for each of the scenarios and any other questions that you have, and think about whether or not you need additional information or whether or not you can make a determination about their eligibility. But I'd like for this table to start with scenario number 1. This table to start with scenario number 2, so we can make sure we get through all the scenarios. And this table to start with scenario number 3. This one with 4, right here. And the Madison group start with number 5. If you would start with number 5, I believe it's on the back there, and then go back to 1 and proceed on through to all 5 of them. But I want to make sure that each one of them gets a fair shake. If you could read them, take about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more, but 10 minutes to read through them and talk amongst yourselves and come to some conclusions. I'll be walking around if you need anything.
We don't, if they tell us they're double dice,
Got about 2 minutes. We are working off of the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, which includes any kind of a loss of housing and somebody had to move, noting that 74% of the kids that we deal with are living doubled up with somebody. They're not living on the street, they're not living in a car, they're living with somebody else, a relative or a friend. So it includes all of that. So are they eligible? Okay, everybody, let's come back here. I'm going to go over there and stand next to John, which means that everybody be quiet, right? Right, John. Okay. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to each table, and the one that you started with, I'm going to ask somebody at your table to read that scenario, and then let's talk about it, and that table will start. Talk about what you found for that, and then we can all respond and react to that, okay?
Okay, I can't see, so kids want us to read.
Miss Fry recently left her husband and took her 2 daughters with her to live with a friend temporarily. They're living doubled up due to a loss of housing. One of the daughters is in the 3rd grade and the other is in the 5th. However, there is not enough room for all 3 of them at the doubled up location. So the older daughter was sent back to live with her father, who is not homeless, until Mrs. Fry gets her own place. Would the 5th grade daughter be considered homeless since she's living with her non-homeless father?
We said call Skip.
Somebody already did.
That's why you got called.
Okay, so what was your, and use the microphone so that they can hear you on the
Sorry.
video.
We said homeless because we didn't know the situation with mom and dad, whether the child would be going back with father, whether it was a fixed, because of the separation she could possibly going back with them. So we looked at the fixed, and we said we would qualify this child as homeless.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments about this first one? Anybody else have any comments about this first one? And I meant to do this. The definition is it fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence? That's the definition. Anybody else have anything to say about scenario number 1?
It's real gray.
Here.
It is gray. It's real gray.
It's a real gray one.
That's why you got
Yeah. What we said was exactly what this table said. Is that the going back to the definition that for the daughter, that is not a fixed and regular place for her to be. And so we determined with the district that was, they were homeless, that the daughter was homeless.
Based on fixed, regular, and
Yeah, it was not regular.
not regular.
Skip, would this be one where you would want to get more information and say, okay, now, so is Susie going to be staying with Dad? How often? What's the schedule going to be so you can find out?
Yep.
But even with more information, in my opinion, because it's a separation, divorce, it could change at any moment. Mom and dad fighting, it could change tonight if mom decided that she wanted to go back or dad decided. So that was the deciding factor for me.
I think if that's the answer to the question that you get,
You're right.
yeah, that would do it. Anything else that y'all would think about for that one? Any questions or more information you want to have? Okay. How about reading scenario number 2? And who's going to be the reader?
Tamara is a highly motivated but unaccompanied youth who is a senior and very much wants to go to college. The district homeless liaison determined that she is also homeless. She wants to apply to 3 colleges in Florida but cannot afford the application fee, nor can she afford the fees for sending test scores to the schools. She's going to need a place to live and is looking for financial aid that will cover on-campus room and board. What can be done to help her?
Okay, so go ahead. So just talk about yourself. What kind of conclusion did you come to?
So to help her, we can ask for those fees to be waived, the registration and the college fees. But I really wasn't sure about the fees for sending test scores to the schools. What fees are those? There's usually not fees associated with sending test scores to schools. So
Yes.
there are?
Yes.
I'm not aware of any.
I haven't ran into those, so. And
When you
part of the
take the
question.
ACT
Part
or
of
the
your application.
SAT, part of the ACT and the SAT require, you are
List.
able to put school numbers and then those, I'm not mine.
She's
And
fine.
then those results are sent directly to those schools for which the student requested.
Is there a limited amount of schools that you can request, or you can do as many as you want?
I think
There's
it
at least
lists like
3.
5, but I've never had a student want to send more scores than the little room is available.
No.
Anybody else from these days? Comments? Questions? Hang on a second.
I think you maybe should have signed my name below this one because I just emailed him this week, I think, or last week about something like this. But I was going to say, though, say, what if the kid changes their mind after they've already documented the schools or whatever, and then what's that process? And my issue last week that was similar to this was high-achieving senior who is college-bound and homeless. has already used 2 ACT waivers, and they're really only allowed 1, but he's already used 2. Guidance counselor got his application fees to college waived and all, but he needed to take the ACT. He needed a couple points to get a full ride for something else, needed to take ACT, and so that was I was kind of like, like, what do I do? We couldn't tell this kid, no, he's college bound, he has to go. We have to get him in, and we have to get him tested, pay for this test now. But that was I was kind of stuck there.
Anybody have anything to say with response to Amanda's
I think the guidance
question?
counselor can do it again, can't they? Doesn't the guidance counselor have discretion to do another fee waiver?
She couldn't waive it again.
Then I'd use the slush fund and pay for it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that were initial, and all that was the question about the test score fees. That was part of the question that we got, and so there are some schools where sometimes where that does come into play, but not very often at all. You can contact the financial aid administrator at the college and see what you can do about the different kinds of things and see if they can waive a fee as well. The test taking fee, maybe not. This is where your partnerships come into play a lot. There are usually people in the community who would be happy to pay for somebody's test fee. And that's the kind of thing that you don't want to use your McKinney-Vento funds for this unless you really have to, but you can. You can use McKinney-Vento funds for this as long as that's going on. Let me see. Okay, so the final recommendation that we had was do this ahead of time. Find out what the closest colleges are, the state colleges are, and begin to establish a working relationship with the financial aid administrator there and be proactive.
I was just going to say that was kind of part of our problem with this was he had used 2 waivers and he was 2 days out from deadline for registration. Right. And so we had to get him, and I didn't really have time to go out and it was a sticky situation where, I didn't have any, so I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, you can, as long as everything else has been exhausted, then certainly you can do that. Anything else about the college scenario?
The housing is that whole...
the housing part, yeah.
The housing is that whole scholarship housing program that we had a conference call on it. Those guys that do all that free housing, if you have a 3.0 or above. What's it called, Cheryl? Yeah, it's at all the colleges, most of the big colleges, Florida Scholarship House. And it's free housing. And they feed them, food and board.
By the way, related to the housing, for the federal, the free FAFSA, free application, financial aid, yeah, whatever. They do not consider living in a dormitory to be fixed, regular, and adequate. I need to check this out to make sure that I'm interpreting this right, but I think I am. I'm pretty sure that I am. That the Board of Governors just passed a rule that agrees with that, so that for the qualifying for the 1009.25 scholarship or the fee waiver, the fee exemption for tuition and fees. That's been a problem in the past where local schools have said, no, you're not qualified anymore because you're not homeless anymore because you have fixed, regular, and adequate because you're in the dorms. And they said, no, that's not true. So we'll send that. I wouldn't act on that until the next time we have a bi-monthly meeting at the beginning of January, but let's make sure that gets on the agenda to confirm that. Okay, scenario number 3. Who's the reader?
I think somebody besides Karen should be.
The Connor family recently lost their home to foreclosure and had to move in with friends. Miss Connor decided to enroll her first grader and fourth grader in the zone school for their friend's address, which is 3 blocks away. After 2 weeks at the new school, the children have told Ms. Connor that they do not like their new school and want to go back to their old school, which is 30 minutes away. Which school is the school of origin for these children?
What was your conclusion there?
Well, we concluded that the district from which they moved is the zone school.
School of origin? Or the
Yeah, school of origin,
of
I'm sorry, school of origin.
Okay. And why is that? What was your rationale? 'Cause
Well,
living
they were
with-
there
They're
before,
living
yeah.
with other people now.
And that wasn't where they actually started.
It was the school they attended before they lost their home.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else come to a different conclusion or need some additional information?
Is it the beginning of the school year that they enrolled in, or is it in the middle of, or into the school year?
It doesn't say. Which would you like it to be?
Well,
But here, ask your question.
The question is it when the school year started, did she start the children in this new school, or were they already enrolled and already had a teacher in, part of the classroom and then transferred or,
that's fine.
Anybody have you guys want to respond? You guys want to respond to that as to whether or not that makes a difference or what difference it makes? You're on.
Well, I think, the intent of the family was to remain at their school where they were originally housed. And their plans were to continue at that school. I don't think this is a situation in which during the summer they shopped for a school and said, we've lost our home, so we're going to go live in Gulf Breeze so we can attend Gulf Breeze school. In our mind, we see this as being the school of origin is a school where they attended school when they became homeless. Therefore, that remains their school of origin. And the district is then responsible for school of origin transportation if it's in the best interest of the child.
And that was the answer that we gave. And it's not only the school that they attended when they became homeless, or the last school attended before becoming homeless in case it happened over the summer. Mm-hmm. So that continues to be there. That 3 weeks at this school doesn't make that school become their school of origin.
Okay. Could you say that last part again? That last school attendant piece, so everybody.
Yeah, the last.
Get that real clear.
It's the school attended when they last school attended when they became homeless, or the school they were attending when they became homeless, or the last school attended before they became homeless, in case they become homeless over the summer, or a break, or something like that. Okay, number 4. Who's going to be the reader? Cheryl.
The Hernandez family was evicted from their apartment in August because Mr. Hernandez lost his job and has only been able to find temporary work since then. When a guidance counselor at the children's elementary school was making the determination of homelessness, he discovered that the family had a preschool-age child too. The parents would like to enroll this child in a preschool program. A new law in Florida makes homeless preschool children a high priority for enrollment. However, the family is undocumented. If children are undocumented, can they still receive priority treatment by the local Early Learning Coalition?
What was your conclusion?
Well, that was a tough one, but we decided that since the regular kids who are undocumented they can have a right to immediate enrollment without documentation, that these students would have a right to the Early Learning Coalition.
Anything else from this? Okay.
Are we correct?
Well, we have a comment over here.
I had that same situation where we had a child that was in pre-K, tried to enroll, and they had to be certified by the early childhood education, and they did not want to certify the child because the mother did not have a U.S. driver's license, even though she had an international driver's license, and they said that wasn't enough documentation. I had to go to the head of the Early Learning Childhood Coalition in order to get that child enrolled. But yes, My answer on that was yes, they did have the right to that pre-K education.
Any other comments or questions about this one? That was what we said too. That yeah, they continue to get priority. Now the difference between K through 12 and pre-K is that there are only so many slots available, and so they may be priority, but if everything's filled, everything's filled. So they can. So you want to make sure that you identify pre-K students as soon as possible, so that you can. They have the best chance of getting into a pre-K program.
So undocumented are on this list for ELC, early learning homeless.
Well, homeless children are.
Homeless.
And yeah, and the experience that we've had is that they.
I'm sorry, homeless children. Thank you, Charlie. Homeless children are on the list as being priority, and whether or not they are documented is not a key factor. Okay. Last one. Who's going to be the reader over here? Here, wait. Okay.
Anna is a 16-year-old who enrolled in the school district's virtual school in May. When she came to complete the registration paperwork, she came with her husband and mother-in-law. Over the summer, she and her husband separated and divorced. She has a court-appointed appointment next month to reclaim her maiden name. Anna is now living with her brother, who is married with children. She says that she is happy with the arrangement, has everything she needs, and that her status is emancipated. Is Anna homeless? Is Anna unaccompanied? Is Anna emancipated for the purposes of making educational and medical services decisions? We said Anna is not homeless, and she is not unaccompanied, and yes, she has the purpose, she is emancipated for making her decisions. We might be wrong.
Okay, so she is not homeless, you said.
That's what we said.
Okay. She is, what did you say about unaccompanied?
We said no.
She's not unaccompanied.
That's, yeah.
And what about
And
emancipated?
we said that she is emancipated for making her.
She is emancipated. And what was your rationale for her being emancipated?
She'd been married and divorced and gone through the legal system, so we thought she was emancipated.
And if that doesn't qualify you for being emancipated, I don't know what does. Okay. All right. Any additional information anybody would want for that one?
Well, is she living with him temporarily?
Well, no, she says she's happy and she has everything that she needs, and she's with the arrangement. Yeah.
Is she living there for financial reasons? Is she living there because she can't afford to live somewhere else?
Good
Does
question.
she have to live there?
Good question. Okay.
Is she legally emancipated?
Okay. Is she legally what? Has she legally been emancipated? Yeah, and that was the question I had was because she was married, because she was divorced, she's still 16. Does that make her emancipated legally? I'm not sure. So let's ask Karen what happened in this case.
Okay, well, this was my situation, and it was an interesting one. You know, we go back to partnerships through our coalition. I became friends with Leslie Powell, who's an attorney with Legal Services of North Florida. So I really wanted to make sure that I understood, first of all, when a minor marries, I understood that they were then considered of majority, really. They're no longer considered a minor when they're married. So if she's getting a divorce, did she continue to hold that status? And she verified for me that yes, indeed, even as a 16-year-old, she has been married, she is emancipated, she keeps that status. Okay, so then the other part of this was she is doubled up. I had to verify that it was due to economic hardship, and that indeed this situation was fluid. So she is, for right now, staying with a relative, but it was due to economic hardship, and so she met the definition for homelessness because it was not a regular It was a temporary situation. So we determined that she was eligible for services, but she was homeless. She was not an unaccompanied homeless youth
And why was she not unaccompanied?
because she was emancipated.
She was emancipated, not because she was with the relative, but because she was emancipated.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments about that? Anybody have similar situations to these? Yeah. We'll give it time, you will.
Let me just clarify, if you're young, you're under 18, you get married, that's like you're been emancipated. But if you get divorced, you keep the emancipation.
Yes, you do. And I checked that one out, you know, and that was the case, yes.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
Since she's 16, and she's doubled up, temporary housing, then she's homeless.
Yes,
Okay.
Homeless, emancipated, but not unaccompanied.
yeah. See how that made my head hurt?
We keep bringing her age up because she's 16. What if she were 18?
Well, then she would be the age of majority. If she's 18, she's the age of majority. And so she can make decisions, her own decisions and everything.
But she'd still be homeless.
No, certainly she would still be home.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That was enjoyable for me to put together and enjoyable for me to listen to you guys wrestle with it. I have two things. I have two things here. Yeah. First of all, did everybody get a copy of the draft of our updated homeless education program brochure? Okay, because I need you to take a look at that. We made a couple of revisions to what we call it, and we made a couple of revisions to some of the bullets to make them clearer, and in one case to make a correction. So please take a look at this and let me know what you think. You should have my email address. You certainly have Lorraine's email address on the back of the brochure. But send me an email, give me a call, talk to me about it. Let me know, because we want to go to print pretty soon. We are out of these and want to get them to people, and we need to get them to somebody to translate into Spanish as well. The other thing that I wanted to do while I have the microphone is who's been on this job for a month or less? 2 months or less? 3 months or less? There you go. Oh, you get something, yes. This is a video, an award-winning video from the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth called My Own Four Walls. Many of you who've been around probably have a copy of this. And it's a documentary about homelessness. Okay, who's new this year? All right.
I'm doing the
come on
unaccompanied
then.
youth part
All
next,
right,
before we get to
okay.
this, okay?
All right, so I gave my four away. There you go, sure enough. Okay, and my telephone number is, if you don't have it, is 850-245-0089. If you don't get me sitting there, I have a voicemail machine, and I'll call you back. I'm not as good as Lorraine is at calling you back, because she will call you right back, and I might take an hour. So anyway, so there you have that. You have the draft, and I gave away the videos, and I think I have to give up the microphone now.
Nope, I got the wireless
Well,
here,
yeah,
so.
sure, let's take it over anyway. Thank you very
All
much.
right, let's thank Skip, please. Appreciate that so much. Skip and Lorraine are just awesome at being supportive, and they are so responsive. It is really nice to know that you can call and verify that you're doing the right thing, and they walk you through any kind of dispute or issue you have. It's really a nice resource. And I would think, Skip, that if someone from the community wanted to call and talk with your office, you'd answer the phone.
They do all the time.
Okay, all right, so homeless coalitions and service providers, Make sure you call Skip or Lorraine if you have a question, because we're supposed to be partners. Okay, so when I did the Survey Monkey with y'all, one of the things that people requested was more information on unaccompanied homeless youth. And I am not the guru on this, but we've worked on this a lot in our county, so I have learned some things, and I'm happy to share. I'm not the end-all be-all by any means. I've learned a lot by going to national conferences and then also going to the Florida Supportive Conference. The national conferences have been great, really, because you find out about what other states are doing. And in fact, you're getting some brochures. I think Kay passed out some brochures for the next NACCE conference in Kansas City. And it is an amazing conference. Amazing conference. And it's not just for K-12 folks. It's for post-secondary, it's for service providers. It's an amazing, amazing conference, and you bring back lots of great ideas. So a lot of what I have in here actually came from there. This is a conglomeration. What I'm going to show you, I actually presented, and by the way, my friend Dawn put this whole PowerPoint together. I just give her the information, and she's the talent behind the scenes who puts this PowerPoint together. But I actually presented this information to Department of Children and Families and their staff that do the access approval, because we found out when we brought in, our program assists our youth and families in filling out the access application to get TANF, to get Medicaid, to get food stamps, or SNAP as we now call it. And so as we're doing these, many times, especially with our homeless unaccompanied youth, you run into somebody who may not know the law or be familiar because they don't approve as many applications for homeless unaccompanied youth. And so we sat down and met with those folks. Again, guess where I got my first contact with somebody who could really help me? Through going to the coalition meetings. It was at a homeless coalition meeting where I met Randy Fleming, who was the Director of Community Development for DCF. And from him, he started to be my go-to person. When I had a DCF question, I'd call Randy, call Randy, call Randy. I have him on my phone now because he was so helpful. From that, because we were having trouble getting our SNAP applications, Medicaid applications approved, we just asked him to get the powers that be, could we sit down and talk through this? So we had somebody who was a supervisor for approving the SNAP applications through the Access website. And she said, I don't think the staff clearly understands unaccompanied youth. We really don't. We could probably use some training on this. Now at the time, they changed the way in which those SNAP applications were approved, and instead of being approved locally, it was all going to Tallahassee. So now you were getting somebody who may or may not know you, who you have a rapport with, and so that things really became lost in translation. So they're working to change that and kind of decentralize that approval process. So anyway, so I went to their office in Pensacola, and there were about 30 folks there that help with that Medicaid and SNAP approval process, and that's where this came from. So some of this information is kind of ground laying information. So there's some information about the definition for homelessness. So I'm going to whiz past some of these, but then for some folks, maybe this is good stuff. So I'm probably going to have to go fast to get us through the rest of our day. So you have the PowerPoint there, okay? And I'm happy to send it to you, or Dawn's happy to send it to you electronically. So if there's something I need to stop and we need to talk about, or if you have something that you would like to add to the conversation, please do, okay? So I wanted to show the folks at Access historically where we were in Santa Rosa County, and so you can just see our numbers. We ended last year with 1,703 homeless students. Out of that, 155 unaccompanied youth. Numbers going up every year. By the end of this year, we'll surpass that 1,703. We're at about 1,500 right now in our county, and 85 unaccompanied youth, unaccompanied homeless youth. I provided them with the definition, and I'm showing you this stuff also because if you want to go back and use this for your awareness or for training, you're welcome to have it. I talk about our school district responsibilities because sometimes folks that are outside of K-12 have a mindset about what K-12 is, that we're interested in getting kids in seats in school. And we know, and probably those of you who are service providers here or Homeless Coalition folks know, we're talking about housing, health, attendance, shelter. We want to serve the whole child, the whole family, but sometimes folks from other agencies don't get that. So I really wanted them to know about our responsibilities, what I was supposed to do as the homeless liaison. Again, giving them the definition of the fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. And then I gave them those 6 categories, which we all know qualify under the McKinney-Vento definition for K-12. I gave them some information on homeless and non-homeless children and the effects of homelessness on child development. It's at this point that I like to also bring in that new statute that's passed that prioritizes our homeless kids. We talk about the barriers, and we've talked about these as we've walked around the room today. This slide is really, I put this in a lot of awareness presentations that I do because we know that for those of us who may not be in a school or on the bus or in the cafeteria, we're not the ones that are identifying the kids. It's the people who interact with our children and our families every day. So I like to be able to just give them the red flags. Then I talk about barriers to early childhood and the effects of mobility. It's all in there. And this slide happens to be in our county now. We have 33 campuses. So 4 years ago, we started to have a McKinney-Vento school-based liaison on all our campuses. And so every year I do an annual training with them. And they are the go-to person at the school. And they certainly, call our office. But they need to know that if they have a question, they don't have to call me on the phone. First, they can go to John, who's the school-based liaison at East Milton Elementary School. And I've asked the principals to pick somebody who has a fire in their belly for doing this kind of work. And sometimes it's a guidance counselor, sometimes it's an AP, sometimes it's a principal, sometimes it's front office staff that just really, really want to take this on and help kids get resources. This has helped so much with us being able to reach out and to do our jobs to support our kids. And so then we talk about some of those resources that are available. And these are also in the brochure that we have, and I think Dawn brought some of those with her in the back. I'm a former special ed teacher. And so as a special ed teacher, if my kids couldn't learn in the method that I was teaching them, well then what do you do when you've got a kid and he can't learn in the method you're teaching him? You do what? Yeah, you figure it out another way. You try another way. And I really feel like homeless education is like that too. Or any profession in which we're working with under-resourced kids and their families. If you don't have a service that they need, then you figure out how you're going to get the service. And that's what all the partnerships are about. And so I think I might have advanced myself. Anyway, so we really want to figure out what can we do. So 3 years ago, our numbers for homeless unaccompanied youth really started to go up. And so we really needed to start educating people on what that was. And of course, guardianship, unaccompanied youth is not always in the presence of a parent or guardian. We enroll them immediately. And so a lot of this information, starting here, is for our high school folks, as well as explaining to those folks at DCF who work with the access application what an unaccompanied homeless youth is. A youth not in the presence of a parent or guardian. There are really, you probably know this as well as I do, but in your community, probably, I'm going to guess, does your community readily know that you have kids who couch surf? Your community, they know that? Wow, that's great. Kate shook her head no. Do people in your community know that a lot of times parents will say, you're 18, I'm done, go. Sometimes it's hard for people to fathom that actually occurs. Once people in our community started finding out that I had 155 homeless unaccompanied youth, they were outraged and they wanted to help. So I share this information with a lot of Rotaries, Optimist Club, faith-based organizations, because once they find out, they want to help. Here's how I explain homeless unaccompanied youth. And this is an exercise that maybe you want to use maybe in something that you do. I ask people, and I'm just going to ask you to do this with me. I want you to picture in your mind your young adults that you've raised. And if you don't have a young adult that you've raised, perhaps you have a niece or a nephew or a neighbor, or maybe it's you. You were the young adult, okay? So picture that young adult and picture that young adult's parent. Probably that's you, okay? And think about the level of support and love and nurturing and supervision you provided that young adult through high school, through college. My kids now are 27 and 28, and I still talk with them, a couple times a week. My daughter had a dog that needed medication, and she didn't have the money, and she called me, and I went to Bank of America. I put the money in there. She still knows that I'm there. So now I want you to picture yourself or your young adult. Picture that person and take everything away. Take all that away from them. Where would they be without that nurturing and support that you've given them? They could be a homeless unaccompanied youth. And what I also like to say is that not only are they a homeless unaccompanied youth, but they have the potential to do what? To have a family. So if we don't intervene with our homeless unaccompanied youth, we may inherit a whole family. And many times we know that happens. Once you've been homeless, what is the likelihood that you're going to be homeless again? It increases. So I really try to get them here. Okay. So the local liaisons, of course, we're supposed to assist those students to enroll in school first of all, and including those runaway students. I don't know about you, but sometimes I work with guidance counselors, especially at the high school level, and I find two kinds of guidance counselors. I find guidance counselors that are nurturing, and they want to do everything to help those kids. That's their passion. And then you find sometimes that you might have somebody who has the mindset that they get schedules. They write schedules. They want to make sure the kids meet the criteria for AP classes, dual enrollment. They get them where they need to go. But that social work hat is not there. And so sometimes you get the attitude that, well, they just don't want to live at home. That's why. They're just not living at home because they don't want to follow the rules. There's a home there. This is the kid's problem. And so our attitude with that kind of mindset is kind of the same with being a mandated reporter. When you are a mandated reporter and you suspect abuse or neglect, what do? You make the call, right? You don't wait to investigate, you make the call. So when you have an unaccompanied homeless youth, regardless of whether you think they're not following the rules or they are, we do what? We enroll them. That's not our job to discern right then what's going on. We enroll them because the best place for them is where? In school, right? It's in school. So that's what we really try and hammer home when we talk about that homeless unaccompanied youth. Patricia Julianelle, I heard her speak actually, it was last year, not this year, but last year at the Florida Supportive Housing Conference. And I thought this was a really great analogy. She was talking about not immigrants, but aliens or people who leave their country.
Migrant workers?
No, it just left my mind. Doggone it. It's a legal status, and now I can't think of what the word is. We just had one last year, Dawn. A student who was they're protected. They leave their country. They come to
I couldn't think of the kid's name, and I can't think what he was called. Sorry.
All right. I'll give you a particular. Yes. No. Refugees. Thank you. That's the word. All right. See, I had one too many spoonfuls of mashed potatoes. Okay. So refugees. This is how Patricia Julianelle kind of drew the analogy between refugees and unaccompanied youth. When you are a refugee, you uproot yourself from your culture, your country, your community, because things are bad where you are, right? We've got, refugees from Haiti, many other countries. They come to the United States. They uproot themselves and they put themselves in this foreign place where they don't know whether their needs are going to be met or not. They just hope it gets better, right? It's extreme. She likened unaccompanied homeless youth to refugees because many times those children have been in a home where there might have been a roof over their head and running water and electricity and food, but something's not right and they have to take that risk and essentially become a refugee. So it's extreme to leave your home. So instead of us splitting hairs as to why, now that might be an answer down the road. Maybe they need counseling. Maybe there's sometimes down the road might be reunification. And that might be Department of Children and Families, or it might be some other service provider, but from the school perspective, we get them in school and then we get them the resources that they need. So I like to be able to try and use that analogy that Patricia gave because I really think it makes sense for us to understand. Kay is so right. When you listen at the NACCE conference to the kids talk about, now the NACCE conference, we have the Laton Scholarship. So are there 15 kids who have been homeless who apply for scholarships, and NACCE awards these scholarships every year, and there are 15 that are awarded. And those kids come, and many of them, they've been homeless unaccompanied youth, or they've been homeless with a parent. And that was the thing that shocked me the most, the hearing about the comments from the kids who actually had a parent. Because here's something I learned this year at the NACCE conference. Just because you have a parent and you're homeless doesn't make it okay. What we heard from these kids mostly was, I couldn't do anything else. I had to take care of my mom. When it came to writing that college application, I didn't know what to put for extracurricular because I was my mom's caregiver. One student had a parent who was a meth addict. Another student had a mother who was physically disabled. Those kids were caregivers. They were doing amazing things and still going to school, but they didn't know what they could put on this application. That never occurred to me, and that's something I really want to work on with my kids is how in the world can we help them to get some of those experiences so that they are outside. I don't know about you, but a lot of what I am now really came from my extracurricular in high school. It kind of prepared me for what I wanted to do later. To not have those experiences, anyway, so just that's something else to think about. But there's so much we don't know about these kids because they don't share it or because it's painful. But for the impact we can make with this group, to me, is so powerful. And for most of our kids, once they leave K-12, their chances for getting assistance really diminish greatly. They show up in the PSA that John showed. We've got to get them then. And if they're coming to school, they want us to get them and help them. So primary causes, you've got that in here: physical, sexual abuse, neglect, parental substance abuse, extreme familial conflict. Those are some of the reasons. So identifying them, of course, is a two-step process. Living arrangements. First of all, are they homeless? Do they lack that fixed, adequate nighttime residence? And then the second one, of course, not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. I don't know about you, but a lot of these kids, they fly under the radar. So sometimes it's really hard for us to identify them. And the thing that we have to be able to do is to develop relationships. We work closely with our high schools and our guidance counselors. This past year, NACCE was in Atlanta, and from Santa Rosa County, I could drive there. So we have 7 high schools in our county, and we took one person from each of those high schools, because I wanted them to really get this piece so that they could then be that advocate for that homeless unaccompanied youth back at our school. Oh, so let's talk about what they lack. Any questions about the definition before we go on? Okay, so medical care, this is a huge issue. One of the reasons that this is difficult is because, I don't know about you, I had a daughter who tore her ACL in high school, and she was basketball, college, scholarship bound, and she really thought that she was going to go through the rehab faster than anyone else because she just knew her body could do it. She was, you know, so kids at that age, they're invincible. But if you're in homeless unaccompanied youth, then how you're feeling is probably the least of your worries a lot of times. So you neglect your health, especially your teeth. Yes, Sandy.
Okay, this really hits home with me because I had a student whose mother just totally left him. His aunt was trying to care for him. They were living in a shed, outside in a shed, and it was terrible conditions. He had scoliosis and an autoimmune disorder.
Wow.
And he couldn't get any help. He was sick all the time at school, but he had to push that aside because he was more concerned about where he was going to stay that night, if his aunt was going to come home, you know, if he had a ride home, or if he's going to have food to eat, or if he's going to be warm or cold that night. So it was, and his health deteriorated very rapidly because he could not get the medical care he needed.
Exactly, yeah. And you know that one of the reasons that students react that way, or anybody reacts that way, especially when people live in poverty, you know that we take care of the tyranny of the moment. And taking care of our health can sometimes be something future. You know, if you don't take care, if you eat lots of sugar now, maybe later down the road you get diabetes. Well, today if all you have to eat is something with sugar in it, what are you going to do? You're going to eat what's got sugar in it, right? So, yeah, you know you need to exercise or you're not going to be healthy, but right now, that's not the urgent issue. So for this student, the urgent issue was having a roof over his head, just getting any kind of food to eat. So taking care of his health, typically unaccompanied homeless youth delay that.
Because of his autoimmune disorder, his health deteriorated because of the stress he was in.
Right.
So he was in a
Vicious circle.
Yeah, vicious.
Wow. Yeah, that's an excellent example of what happens when we're not taking care of that health issue, because right now those immediate needs, although they may be impacting the health, he's trying to focus on those, so he's not taking care of himself. And we see that a lot with our kids. So anyway, another dilemma, of course, is when you are a minor, you can't consent to your medical care. I'm going to share with you some information that is in Florida statute now, and there's actually some exciting things happening down the road that will really, really help us, and it's not too far away. Okay, so here are some of the issues right now. You need a minor to consent. Even if you are a minor and you have a baby, you can consent for your child's care, but you can't consent for your own care. Did you know that? Doesn't that sound crazy? But it is true. It is absolutely true. So that is a huge barrier for medical care for our unaccompanied youth. So routine medical care and dental care, can't get it. Now you might form a relationship with a doctor or dentist who says, I'm taking care of him, don't you worry. We want to do what's right for this kid. We're not going to worry about the consent. You might get some folks who do that, and I heard about those examples actually at NACI. They can't access preventive health care, which is critical to their safety and welfare, many times because, again, they're taking care of that tyranny of the moment issue. Relative minor conditions worsen before they become emergencies. Of course, when they show up in the ER, then they're going to get seen. But by that time, you think they've been in school? No. So health and attendance and graduating and becoming self-sufficient, they all tie together. The youth that's now missed school, work, places self in health and safety at great risk, in addition to creating overall public safety issues. So it's a vicious circle here, the medical care piece. And I shared with, as we were rotating through our groups, that in our county this past year, kind of by accident, we've developed a health component and used our McKinney-Vento Title X grant. I now have a McKinney-Vento nurse who is specific to focus on the students that are homeless in our community. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, we're building the bicycle as we go along, but I think we're on the right track. I'll tell you about that later. But we're really excited about the opportunity to get our kids and their parents health care now that we didn't have before. So access to health services, of course, this is something that you really, really need to pay attention to. And I did not know this till I started doing some of this research. And some of this came from Diane Cipielli, who is a retired homeless liaison, who worked in Broward County, I believe. Okay, but this is all based in statute. If you have an unaccompanied homeless youth, and they're minor, then consent for medical care has to be given by the person who is a parent or legal guardian. But now here's a list of the individuals who can consent for that student if you can't get to that parent or legal guardian. And many times that's the case, right? We have the kid at school. We just can't communicate with the parent or guardian. They're nowhere to be found. So who else might, maybe sometimes we have a homeless unaccompanied youth who goes to live with a family member, or you know where that family member is. So here's what statute says you can do. If a person possesses that power of attorney to provide medical consent for the minor, after July 1, 2001, they can authorize treatment. But if you don't have them, it could be a step-parent. They don't have to live with the step-parent, but it could be a step-parent that you go out and find or call on the phone. A grandparent, an adult brother or sister, who's obviously a majority, or an adult aunt or uncle. This is in statute. And I didn't know that. I did not know that. So you may know that with the Affordable Health Care Act, starting January 1st, it is mandatory that unaccompanied homeless youth get insurance. It's mandatory. So that means that if I'm a homeless unaccompanied youth and I'm 16, I get family Medicaid now as a household of one, but I can't consent. So we still have that consent issue. That's why this information is really important. If I'm getting Medicaid, but I can't consent, then am I really accessing health care until it becomes an emergency? I'm not. But now you know, if you didn't know before, and I did not know until recently, that you can go down this list and you can find, hopefully, somebody who's going to be able to authorize for that student to get consent. Now, when I went to NACI, I also learned that there are states like California, where starting at age 15, the California statute allows for 15-year-olds and up to consent to their own medical care. And that there is actually legislation in the Florida House right now that they're considering to authorize minors starting at age 16 to authorize and give consent for their own medical care. So we'll see what happens with that. That would help a lot. There's also a dilemma that I just actually found out about yesterday that I want to make sure you know about. For those of you who have helped kids sign up for Medicaid or SNAP, okay, you know that's been a problem. They almost had to pick one or the other. And it was because that minor had to apply for Medicaid as part of somebody's household. Okay? Well, if they applied for Medicaid as part of somebody's household, but they didn't stay there all the time. This is temporary. They move around. So I'm applying for Medicaid, and I'm part of Stephanie's household. I'm under her Medicaid, her family household, and I'm on that application to get medical care. But I couch surf. I only stay at Stephanie's house some of the time. Okay, so then I really can't apply for food stamps on my own. I'd have to apply with Stephanie. So where's my food? It's part of Stephanie's food. So starting January 1, what's going to happen is that I can be a household of one for Medicaid purposes. I don't have to be anymore on Stephanie's Medicaid application. Since I'm a household of one, I can also, if in my application for SNAP, I put that I can store and prepare my own food, I can have my own SNAP benefits.
What age is that?
At any age. And I'll show you that in statute. So, a lot of this information in here you know already. This is for the folks at Access when I did this presentation, talking about what a certified unaccompanied homeless youth is, and we know that can be certified by the liaison, by a shelter, directory of a runaway or homeless youth shelter. okay, here are some questions that I think will be helpful, kind of puts it in black and white and certainly in clearer terms than I can put it. Can a certified unaccompanied homeless youth who is not of the age of majority give consent for his own routine medical treatment? We know the answer to that is no. Do states have statutes that permit access to certain kinds of medical and mental health care for unaccompanied youth? The answer is yes. So what can our unaccompanied youth who are minors access right now? They can consent to pregnancy and STD clinics. So right now, if you have a homeless unaccompanied youth who's a minor, they can get treatment at a pregnancy or STD clinic, okay? And many times if they go there and they've also got strep, they're not going to ignore the strep and just treat the other issue. They'll look at the student and treat the student as well. But what we're authorized to do is to let them consent to STD, pregnancy, mental health, or substance abuse treatment. They can do that as a minor. Can a UI receive emergency medical services? Yes, of course, they can go to the ER and receive those. What health services can they receive in Florida? And every state is different. As I said before, but there's the statute for you. Maternal health, contraceptive information. Services of a non-surgical nature may be rendered to a minor who is married, is a parent, is pregnant, has consent of the parent legal guardian. An unwed pregnant minor may consent to medical or surgical care for services related to her pregnancy, and an unwed mother may consent to the performance of medical or surgical care for services for her child. Okay, there's a lot of text on here. I won't go through all of it, but you have it in your PowerPoint and we'll send it out to you. Again, that STDs and pregnancy and family planning is something that they can give consent to. I'll just read the second paragraph. The disability of a minority for persons under 18 years of age is removed solely for the purposes of obtaining voluntary substance abuse impairment services from a licensed service provider and consent to such services by a minor. Since a minor acting alone has the legal capacity to voluntarily apply for and obtain substance abuse treatment, any written consent may be given only by the minor. So we've got kids that have substance abuse issues and they don't need somebody who is of majority to provide them. Okay, a minor aged 13 years of age or older may consent to outpatient mental health diagnostics and evaluation services. CHIP and Medicaid. What's going to happen as of January 1 is that it'll be called Family Medicaid, but for our homeless unaccompanied youth, they are considered a household of one, and that's big, that's huge. That's a big, big, big change, and it is mandatory, and I have it in writing from DCF, that it is mandatory that our homeless unaccompanied youth, minors, be signed up for medical insurance or for Medicaid. So, yes.
Can I ask you something on that? Do they apply through kids' care or do they apply through the new Obama? Do they apply through the kids' care website or how do they apply?
My understanding that it's going to be through the Affordable Health Care Act application. And hopefully they'll get that smoothed out. But it is Medicaid, family Medicaid that they will get. So they'll also be able to, if you are Medicaid, let me clarify that because this is still really fuzzy and confusing. If you are on Medicaid or you qualify for Medicaid, then you are exempt from the Affordable Health Care Act. But there's some legislation in there that affects Medicaid, okay? So basically, if you are an unaccompanied homeless youth, you qualify for family Medicaid, you sign up through the Access application. Yes. If you're Medicaid or Medicare eligible, then you don't sign up through the Affordable Health Care Act. And if anybody knows differently or you have a better understanding, please chime in. Sandy, you have a question?
If we determine that they are unaccompanied youth, who's responsible, if that's law, who's responsible making sure that they get signed up?
That's a good question, and I think that's something that still, we're going to have to think through that process. It's certainly not our job to think through that process, but it is our job to ask the question, so I'm glad that you did. I think we need to be talking, and I want to tell you that right now, there is a draft of access to health care, on access to SNAP that Lorraine has been working on. I've helped with that work group, as well as Diane Scipielli, as well as the Department of Health, Department of Children and Families, and you know, to go through that process before they get a publication or a technical assistance paper that they can share with everybody is a long process. But I think, Sandy, that some of those procedures are down the road being figured out. They're not being figured out yet. But if we have the information, then we know that on January 1, if you, and I've got 3 people in my office who help our kids sign up for Medicaid using the Access application, you can start telling them now. You know, just in January, we're going to get you signed up, and we can get you signed up for SNAP too, and you don't have to choose between the 2. You're a household of 1, okay? All right, can UI access public benefits like SSI? Are minors eligible for SNAP, known as food stamps? We know that yes, they are eligible. However, no other adult can receive the benefits for the UI. That's why this distinction of a household of 1 really is so important and so big, because now they don't have to choose. Are homeless unaccompanied youth eligible for SSI? If the unaccompanied youth is under 18 and meets a disability requirement, they could get service, they could get SSI. Are minors eligible for cash grants? Or most states do not consider an unaccompanied youth to constitute a family in order to receive TANF, and maybe that'll change down the road. Do homeless adolescents often have a great number of physical and mental health problems than their counterparts? We know the answer to that, don't we? Yes, they do. They've been taken care of other things. How can communities help? That case management piece, getting kids information. I shared with our group when we were rotating through the activity this morning that one of the goals we have for this McKinney-Vento health nurse that we have now is that before our high school kids exit high school, we make sure they are signed up for Medicaid, and we make sure that they know how to navigate the healthcare system, and that, you know, she's going to be giving an assessment to each of those kids to get the baseline for their health, so that if we can take care of those dental issues before they leave high school or any other physical issues that they have, well, let's get that done now. So that's our goal. This first year, if that's all we get done with our health nurses, is making sure our kids that exit high school are on Medicaid and are healthy or on the way to being healthy before they graduate, that's what we want to do. So. Other barriers, of course, lack of transportation, we talked about that one. Confidentiality issues, distrust of adult. And again, look at that bottom sentence. Healthcare may not be a priority over day-to-day survival issues. I think that's one of the biggest ones. That'll wait. I don't have to worry about that now. In addition to obvious physical concerns, what other areas are the UI, do they need treatment? Of course, there's a long list of things you're familiar with: substance abuse, mental health, suicide prevention, victim of violence, post-traumatic stress, STDs, the risk of HIV and AIDS. How many of our kids who are homeless end up being parents before we ever get them out of high school? And those are the kids we really, really need to get to. Okay. All right. These are some suggested strategies, although you're not going to find them in law. Have the parent or guardian sign a healthcare power of attorney. Get a phone consent from a parent. If parents can't be contacted, will a relative consent? And you saw that list. Liaison advocacy. When I was at NACI, I heard a lot of the liaisons say, the way I get my kids health care is by building those relationships with those local physicians, healthcare clinics, dentists. ask DCF for help. And that's a lot of times what, especially with homeless unaccompanied youth, I'll call them on the phone all the time. I don't know about y'all, but they've become good friends of ours because they really want the best. Oh, here's another thing that I've kind of worked out, especially in my conversations with DCF, that helps me explain to other people. Do you ever get the question, when you talk about homeless unaccompanied youth, and let's say they're 16, oh, I've got a kid, he's been living in his car, or he's living in a tent or a shed, and he's 16. And what do people say when you say that? Why haven't you made the call to DCF? Why isn't DCF involved? Why aren't they in foster placement? Have you ever gotten that question before? Okay, I always wondered that too. And then, but I know, I know that we've got those kids who fall between the cracks, but why? So I asked my friend Randy, please help me explain to people why those kids aren't in foster placement. Why aren't they a ward of the court if they're 15 or 16 or 17 years old? And he explained it like this. He said, just like in an emergency room, you have to triage. You're going to take care of the most vulnerable, the most injured patients first. When we're talking about taking care of children and we have limited foster placements, we've got to prioritize too. So who do we need to remove from the home first? Those that are most vulnerable, our youngest children. So we are already at capacity with our foster placements in our community. And now we've got a 16 or 17-year-old, and yes, indeed, there might be something going on in that family. There's not a capacity to assist them. There just isn't enough. And so if we're not going to remove Stephanie from the home, maybe we're providing some assistance to the home already to try and get things stable. Maybe we've helped with the younger children too. But Stephanie's in that home, and Stephanie's not getting removed. And so what does Stephanie do? Stephanie's going to remove herself, right? She's going to say, I had enough of this. I'm 16. I'm going to take my backpack and I'm going. And so Stephanie is going to remove herself. Like our refugees remove themselves from a foreign country or a place in which they are at risk. She's going to remove herself. So that's how I've kind of helped, I kind of understood a little bit better that dilemma of what's going on. Okay, so then I just give them, this is just public information, not necessarily just for unaccompanied homeless youth, but some of the ways in which we provide some resources. You're familiar with all of those. Here are a couple resources we've developed in our county related to homeless unaccompanied youth. We have a Backpack for Teens program. We started this about 3 years ago. It started out with me getting $3,000 from our local United Way. And Dawn and another friend of ours would go shopping at Sam's or Bay Area Food Bank, and they'd buy whatever was on sale. They'd get all the cup of soups that were there. They would get, beef jerky, water, anything that they could find that was on sale. And so we had something to give the kids. And we did a pilot on this for about 6 weeks to see if our high school homeless unaccompanied youth would like it. Well, they did. So the next year, I can't remember where we got the money the next year, but again, we were still trying to piece together this backpack program, and I presented at a local meeting, and people from Manna Food Bank were there, and they said, we're in the business of raising food for hungry people. You guys do case management. We're going to take over the food piece for you. And so now, 4 years later, we have nutritionally balanced meals that Manna assembles for us. Our school district distributes to our high schools, and we do the case management that goes with it. So you might have a food bank out there who will partner with you. They want to do the food piece, but they want somebody to do the case management piece, so we work together and both our goals are met. And that came from me just going and giving a speech. Sometimes you think, oh, I'm wasting my time just going and presenting, but somewhere a seed gets planted and somebody comes back and says, hey, we might be able to do something together. So anyway, that's how the backpack program happened. We have our college day transition trips that we have done for the past 3 years. We have a really formal process now. It had been in place, and I, got money from here and money from there, money from here, and then the Wells Fargo grant came about this past year, and so I've been able to use that money to help with the trip. The cool thing was, part of my budget I had allocated for caps and gowns for our homeless unaccompanied youth. And when I went to NACY with the guidance counselors and the assistant principals from our high schools, and I was saying, okay, when we get back, I need to get the names of your kids and measurements because we got to go ahead and order the caps and gowns because I'm paying for that with the grant. And they looked at me like I had two heads and said, why are you paying for those caps and gowns? Herff Jones, if you go to Herff Jones and you tell them what you're going to do, they'll give them to you. I said, you are kidding. And I had allocated like $700 for caps and gowns. Don't tell them I said this. And erase that from the tape. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but I called up Herff Jones and I told them what I needed, and they donated 18 caps and gowns, which saved me $600-something, which I then used to buy another laptop for another kid. So this is part of our college day trip. We go to these colleges. We sit down every year with the college folks, and so they know us. So the financial aid administrators and the admissions people know us. And one of the things that we've learned is that those are two separate offices. And you really have to have somebody go with those kids to those offices, because if you don't, they get discouraged and they leave. And they don't talk to each other. Now, we kind of muddled through this process and it was kind of frustrating. So now we really have a go-to person at Pensacola State and at UWF. And when we have issues and we are having trouble proving residency, because you get if you're independent, if you're a homeless unaccompanied youth, you can file independently, right? You can get the waiver for the application because you got the ACT and SAT waiver. You can ask for a fee exemption, but they don't necessarily have to give it to you. But if you have the Pell, hopefully you can pay for your tuition. If you get the fee exemption, then you can pay for living expenses with the Pell, okay? But you still have to prove your residency when you're homeless and you're applying to go to college. And that can be the tricky part. And that's where we've really had to do a lot of negotiating with our local colleges and universities, because that residency part is tricky. And sometimes the folks at the university are saying, well, John, I know you're not living with your dad anymore, and I know things weren't good, but I want you to go take this affidavit to your dad, and I want him to sign this to say he's not supporting you financially. We've had those kind of requests. And then we've had to call and say, are you kidding? You're going to send John back into this household that he left because of domestic violence? That's not a good idea. So we really had to have those conversations. So once we've had those partnerships, we're having less of those conversations because we have that go-to person now. But that's taken time, and it's frustrating because every year there are new people at the university, so guess what? Every year you go back and you have the conversation again, and we've gotten frustrated about that, and finally we just had to say, you know what, every year we'll have to do this, and it's okay, we will, because people are new and there's turnover. So there's a lot of follow-up that happens during the summer with a lot of our kids, because sometimes they don't get accepted till summer. And yet, they're graduated, so technically, are they our kids yet? Well, they might not be students of the school district anymore, but yeah, they're our kids, and we want to get them successfully to college and careers, so we do it. This is a slide that I put in there when I train groups or I meet with groups, even churches. How can I help? This is especially for school staff or anybody who works with kids. And this is the slide for organizations if they want to donate. I think I want to make this slide a little more detailed. I want to put on there, good can openers, toothpaste, toothbrushes. Those are things that you could, when you get an organization that calls and says, how can we help? What can we do? Let us help. We want to help. You could say, I want some good can openers or toothpaste or toothbrushes. Host home is another thing that we implemented recently in our community for our kids who are unaccompanied because we didn't have a homeless youth shelter. And there's some resources. Okay. Do you all have questions about any of the information that I have? Do you guys want to take a 5-minute break before we do our last activity, or do you want to motor on through? Or do you want to stand up for a minute? Are you brain dead? No? Yes? Okay. All right. Well, this is the next activity that we're going to do is actually a hands-on activity. So here's what I need you to find. This is really the cooperative piece between your homeless coalitions and the school district. I need you to find, there's a goldenrod sheet. It has the NACY logo at the top. There's a blue one that has the new NACY logo that says Building Futures Through Education. It's about the continuum of care piece. There's a turquoise one that says Heart-backed Education Assurance Policy. And there's a green one that says Before Starting Exhibit 1, Continuing of Care. Can you get those all out? Let's look at the goldenrod one first. When I had you do the Survey Monkey, I asked if there were folks familiar with the Hearth Act. So let's just, a show of hands, who's familiar with the Hearth Act? Okay, we've got a few. And so then this will be good information, a review for some of us, and maybe for some of us this will be new information. I just want to read this goldenrod sheet first as kind of an introductory piece, and then we're going to break you up into group because there are 4 HUD assurances that require collaboration between coalitions and school districts. And since we have 4 groups, we're going to break up and have each one digest that HUD assurance and then just teach it out to the rest of us. So let's look at this for just a second. What the Hearth Act says about schools and service providers working together. I'm just going to read some of this, so bear with me. The Hearth Act added new education-related requirements for continuums of care and homeless services. Now, the continuum of care is that piece that is housed with the homeless coalitions and that threads together the services within the community that provide that support to homeless children and families. That's really a simple, it's not a very sophisticated way of saying what it is, but kind of, is that what it is? Directors, did I represent that okay? I mean, it was pretty basic, but.
Single adults, children, anybody who's homeless.
Anybody who's homeless. Okay, thank you. All right, what are the education-related requirements for continuum of care? This is real important to us, school people. There are 2 specific requirements for continuance. They must collaborate with local education agencies, that's the school district, to assist in identifying homeless families and inform homeless families and youth of their eligibility for McKinney-Vento services. They must consider the educational needs of children and families are placed in emergency or transitional shelters, and to the maximum extent practicable, placing families with children as close to possible to their school of origin as not to disrupt the children's education. That means that emergency shelters need to know K through 12 McKinney-Vento law and vice versa. The school folks, we need to know where the shelters are and have a relationship with those shelters. What are the education-related requirements for project applications, the shelter and service programs that receive HUD funds, those federal funds? There are 2 specific requirements. They must establish policies and practices that are consistent with McKinney-Vento Act and other laws relating to provision of educational and related services to individuals and families experiencing homelessness, and their policies and practices must not restrict youth's education rights. For instance, if I'm staying at the Loaves and Fishes shelter, and my school of origin is Bailey Elementary, and it's 15 minutes away, but the elementary school next door is right there, that shelter can't say to me, well, if you're going to stay here, then you have to go to this elementary school next door. You have a right to go to your school of origin. So the school people have to know the rights of our kids that are going to live in HUD-funded shelters, and the shelters need to know our educational rights of our kids too. And probably going to those shelters and providing some services is something that we need to make sure that we're doing as well, if we have shelters. Okay. Programs that provide housing or services to families must designate a staff person to ensure that children are enrolled in school and connected to the appropriate services within the community, including early childhood programs such as Head Start Part C, IDEA, McKinney-Vento Education Services. When did these requirements go into effect? Starting in November 2009. So this is something we should be doing already, and I don't think there's a community that's doing this perfectly. We just have to keep on, developing hardwiring this practice into our communities. We're not perfect at it yet where we are, but we're getting better, and what I'm trying to do is to also make sure those non-HUD funded, we've got some faith-based homeless services in our community. They're not HUD funded, so it isn't required by law, but for goodness sakes, if a homeless family is going to come and stay in one of the shelters that's faith-based, I want to know who those kids are, and I want that shelter to know we'll help them, and we want to take care of those kids, and they still have educational rights we want to protect. Okay? So that's kind of the introduction. Now let's look at, I think we need to divide into 4 groups. So we've got 4 people here. Kay, would you mind joining over here? And if we could have maybe 2 of you come over and make a new group with Kay, then we'll have 4 groups and we'll be able to divide these assurances. Yeah. Oh, cold freezing? I'm so sorry. I hate being cold too. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so now take your aqua and your blue sheet. All right. We're going to have this group be HUD Assurance 1, HUD Assurance 2, HUD Assurance 3, HUD Assurance 4. Okay? You'll look on these 2 pieces. My recommendation is that you go to the light blue document first. This is the one from NACI. And then go back to the teal colored one and fill in the missing parts. Okay? Now, for HUD Assurance 1, also you have another thing to do. There are some best practices on this aqua sheet, okay? For HUD Assurance 1. For HUD Assurance 2, there are some suggested best practices. For HUD Assurance 3, on the back you'll see a few, and for 4, you'll see a few. You're looking for aqua and blue, okay? So, okay, I'll get you another one. Dawn, could you pull out one of these from our extra packets and give it to Shelley, please? All right, before we get there, just for everybody's benefit, I asked John to just kind of give us the Hearth Act Assurance Policy overview. So John, if you'll take about 2 minutes to do that. Remember?
All right.
Hold on, let me get you the mic.
Okay. So I take it everyone has pretty much heard of Hearth Act, right? Okay. Well, both.
Why don't you stand up? Thank you.
So, anyway, while both housing programs and school districts strive to provide the best service possible and link families to one another in order to provide supports, it is still up to the family to choose to use the service. A housing program cannot force a family with a student to be a member of the McKinney-Vento program at the school they are attending, nor can the housing program refuse to provide housing services because of families' choice to not use a school McKinney-Vento program. In addition, the school programs cannot require that a student live in a shelter or be a part of the housing program to receive school-based services. All right, continuum of care. How many of you
are not familiar with the continuum of care? Show of hands. Just a couple. Okay. So the continuum of care is a group of community stakeholders charged with developing a community-wide plan to organize and deliver housing services to meet the specific needs of people who are homeless as they move to stable housing and maximize self-sufficiency. Housing programs refer to any area of housing programs seeking or receiving continuum of care funded originating HUD monies from the COC Homeless Assistance Program. So under the housing program, there is permanent supportive housing. There's also permanent housing without support, transitional housing, homeless management information systems, and emergency shelter are some of the others. In the state of Florida, I'm just going to digress a little bit from this. In the state of Florida, okay, there are 28 continuums of care, or 28 lead agencies charged with publishing the consolidated plan. In fact, our NOFA just came out recently.
What's NOFA, John?
NOFA stands for Notice of Federal Agency Funding Availability. So Notice of Funding Availability. What's important to know about this particular NOFA is that President Obama requested $2.23 billion, but was only approved for $1.7 billion. That's incredibly impactful because nationwide we have about 450 continuums of care that are applying for federal funding. Many of those programs are renewals. In other words, these are programs that have been in existence for many, many years, such as permanent housing, transitional housing, and such. What's going to happen is there is not enough funding in this year's NOFA to support all of those programs. The renewals, not new projects, just the renewals. So communities are encouraged to look at what programs are the highest priority for that continuum of care and then make cuts, okay? And that's impactful for you guys because as these 28 COCs get ready to apply for the federal funding, they're going to be looking at cutting some of those programs that you may have relied upon to make referrals to, such as transitional housing and permanent housing. Okay?
All right, thank you. All right, so here's what I'd like us to do with our last 20 minutes. Ooh, and we're going to have to go fast. Your sections are pretty short, but what I'd like to do is, amongst your group, assign someone to do the light blue section of your assurance, assign someone to do the aqua section of your assurance, okay? So take a few minutes to read over that, and then we'll have each group report out the important points that we need to know about. And then lastly, if you could have somebody in your group, so you've got 4 or 3 in your group, so you may have to just everybody take a job. Look at those best practices in the aqua handout, okay? So just take a minute to assign jobs, best practices, aqua assurance or blue assurance, and take about the next 5 minutes if you would. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right? Any questions? Guys got it? Ma'am? Yes. 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 This isn't to give you, a solid understanding of all this, but it's to give you an introduction, okay? So you don't have to be scholarly on this. Just give us one salient point from what you read, or 2, all right? Because I have a short video I still want to show you before we leave. So we're going to start with HUD Assurance 1. You got 1 minute, John.
1 minute.
Maybe 30 seconds.
I had strategy.
Okay.
Yes, you had this.
Come on.
Okay.
Okay, so basically HUD Assurance 1 is a policy within the Hearth Act, which is the first time the activities of our continuum of care have been put into law. So that's why this is big and new. But this HUD assurance is basically a policy about the continuums of care, collaborating and working with educational systems to identify homeless families and youth, to learn about their eligibility for McKinney-Vento Education Services. So that is basically, I work with the lead agency, the local continuum of care lead agency. It is our responsibility to make sure our local continuum of care, that we are all collaborating together to benefit these children that are in our school systems. And it gives specific ways that we can do that. Make sure that we are knowledgeable about school district liaisons and making sure that they are a part of any local planning processes. So any interagency councils or governing boards you have, make sure that your liaisons are involved in that process. Give specific language and examples about what housing programs can do to identify these children that are homeless and in our school systems. And it talks a little bit about how to open up lines of communication by getting formal releases between housing programs and families and school systems, so you can make sure you're communicating, you have that consent to communicate to access these educational services.
That's critical. That is critical. Okay, you got about 20 seconds, John.
20 seconds. Okay. So one of the things I want to kind of talk about and pick up on this is a memorandum of understanding is important. So having an agreement with your local school district is awesome. Develop protocols for the liaisons to refer clients to your local COC. So having a referral and intake process would be wonderful. In our community, we're developing a centralized coordinated assessment system. And many communities in the state of Florida are encouraged to do that as well. Also, inform the unaccompanied youth of their rights because they have certain rights in order to access the services. And I'll turn it over to you.
All right.
Okay, it includes best practices that talked about the letter that John mentioned. It also requires that the housing programs have the educational rights of homeless children displayed within their project. They also have this is very fast, but they also have the area-wide brochure that talks about the McKinney-Vento services that are available to them. They also invite housing programs into their events. If they're having a family night or if they're having something that's related to, getting the word out about this.
The school district invites those.
The housing project, the housing programs.
Yes.
To come into that. They also invite them in on case management meetings if they're doing anything like that. They can provide space. The housing programs should provide space for those meetings if they need to be at the actual location. And then obviously having links to the school district other services as well. So those were some of the best practices.
Great. All right. Sounds great. Since we've made this local motel one of our emergency shelters, one of my goals this year is to make sure that we educate the staff that are there. We have some good agreements with them already, but I want to put some supplies there. I want to have some school supplies there so that when my families are staying there and they have to do homework at night, there are supplies there available. And you may do that with your shelters already, but I haven't done this with the hotel, so that's what I want to outreach and do. Okay. HUD Assurance 2.
I'm not real sure. Gina, you go first. We were not real sure about. Okay.
I think I know.
Okay. We were not
After
sure.
reading this, it states that for the HUD Assurance 2, that the continuing care of applicants will be required to demonstrate it is considering the educational needs of the children when families are placed in emergency transitional shelter. And the first thing that they're saying that we need to do an intake process where we develop an educational checklist and ask families and the youth different questions. We need to ask the families and youth if they have any concerns about the school's attendance, discuss with the families the impact of changing schools might have on the children's education. That's why we try to keep the children in their school of origin. Once, if they're at a shelter, we keep and they move, we will keep them there at the school of origin. That's why we work very closely with transportation department. When they're also in a shelter, a lot of times that they cannot come into the shelter at a certain time. So what we do is to just talk to the shelter coordinator there and make arrangement for them to come inside the shelter, to have a place where they can study, where they can eat lunch, because a lot of the time, the small children are very hungry, and they cannot sit outside for a couple of hours, so that's what we do.
You're really, from the school district's points with those shelters, you're being an advocate
We are
for their
advocates.
needs, yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Gina, you want to pick up?
Well, I was just, this also puts a lot of weight on the housing program to do this instead of the school district's responsibility to do this. According to the best practices, a lot of that is on the housing. Now, you're talking about the changeover in personnel.
Yeah.
The school district would constantly have to provide
Yeah,
training.
exactly. You're right.
You know, so it ends up sort of flipping back around again.
It does, that constant communication and meeting.
Yeah.
You're right, because of the turnover of employees, but I'm glad you made that point, Gina. So it's really shared responsibility. It's not with one or the other, it's with both. Okay, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think that'll be good.
All right, thank you. Let's go on to HUD Assurance 3. Who are we starting with?
Well, we sort of, at some point, we've already discussed that when the kids go into the shelter doesn't have the right to tell them which school to enroll in, even though that shelter may be zoned for another school. And that's pretty much the main thing. And if the students, the parents want them to stay at the School of Origin, that's fine, but if they want to go, that's another issue as well also. But the kids have a right to go and remain at their School of Origin. And they have a right to continue there, and if the shelter has a tutoring program after school, that still is not a prerequisite for them to go to the school that might be next door or down the street.
Okay.
As a housing provider, I just picked up on the points that we need to have space available for tutoring for children in school, and also space available for people like early Head Start and Head Start to come in and do work with children 0 to 5 and screenings at the shelter. And we do already try to do that, but that's about what I picked up.
Okay.
And on the best practices, that housing programs and school districts will have cross-training opportunities. The Continuum of Care website will have basic training available, and also broader training for explaining to people the school district definitions of homeless. And free educational webinars by the National Center on Homeless Education.
All right, very good. If you're not familiar with those websites, they're great resources for everybody. And by the way, these obviously these documents came from NACI. I just got on the site and searched, and so all right, HUD Assurance 4.
It says to designate a staff person to ensure that children in shelters are enrolled in schools and in appropriate services. So what happens is Sarah will contact us and tell us when somebody's in from the shelter. And since their shelter is a 90-day shelter, the other shelters that we have are mostly 9 months and longer. So we keep in close contact with Opportunity Place, and they contact us. If there is a concern about if a child is in special needs program, like if we want to register in Head Start or ESE programs or
hold your mic closer.
Or any special needs, then we make sure they're assessed and deal with that.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay, so the best practices are making sure that the housing programs ensure that the case managers for the families receive the basic training on the rights of the children and the youth in the schools, which our case manager works very closely with the shelter manager and with these ladies to make sure that, because we have this turnover, that everybody is taken care of and that they keep up with that training. The interagency committee works with local school districts to learn about professional development opportunities that are available and communicate the opportunities to the housing programs.
All right. Got it? All right. Thank you all for helping us summarize that. I know we just hit the nuances, but I hope this document will be helpful for you. Dawn will be digesting all this. Did you have something else to say?
And correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who does continuum of care work, but I think an important distinction is that these HUD assurances, HUD policy, they're mandated for communities who are receiving federal HUD homeless assistance
Right.
grant funding. And these housing program mandates are for housing programs who are receiving HUD homeless assistance grant funding. So it's not like just out of the blue, communities have to do all this stuff. That's where it's like the Hearth Act has things that are required by federal law if you're receiving this funding, but it's also, you can just see it through the other perspective of these are just the right things to do for our community. So it's both a model, it's a mandate in some contexts, but it's a wonderful model as well to use.
Exactly. I'm so glad you made that point. I know that we need to get on the road. Some of us have long drives. I'm going to start a video for you. It's about 7 minutes. If you can't stay and see the whole thing, then just write down, this is a YouTube video. It is called Liz Murray, American Dream. If you've seen the movie Homeless to Harvard, this movie is about Liz Murray. She also has a memoir that she wrote called Breaking Night. She was a homeless, unaccompanied youth. Parents were substance abuse, had substance abuse issue. A mother passed away from HIV-related illness. This is inspiring, and this with unaccompanied homeless youth is a powerful video. But for anybody who works with people in poverty who are homeless, I recommend the book highly, and if you can stay and watch this video, it is worth your while. And thank you. Have a safe drive back to your homes.
My name is Liz Murray, and I'm from New York City. I'm actually from the Bronx. And I guess people most typically know me from my memoir, which is Breaking Night, My Journey from Homeless to Harvard. I mean, when I was young, my idea of the American dream, it wasn't some overarching large thing. I wanted to get food stamps when I was a kid. I grew up in the Bronx. My parents were on drugs. They had partied a little too hard in the 70s, and I grew up in the aftermath of what happened when the party was over, and everyone lived on food stamps. And without a concept of what a job was, I thought the best you could do was get some food stamps. And I think your idea of the American dream gets entirely shaped by the environment that you're in. So how can you ever dream about something that you've never seen? I thought I could get my own apartment, food stamps, live off welfare, be in the Bronx, and that would be a good life. It's, of course, changed so much since then, especially since when people hear that I was homeless and that I graduated from Harvard and I've become this homeless to Harvard person, I find it to be like, those ink blot tests that you see, psychologists will give you and hold up, what do you see in here? It's the most interesting experience of my life, because depending on what people believe, they'll say to me, oh, you're the example of why bootstrapping is a real thing, right? And the American dream, and you embody it. Other people will say, I bet you got where you went because services helped you, nonprofits, right? And thank goodness for those. Your story is the embodiment of that. So I think for quite some time, it took me a while to go through this Homeless to Harvard experience and live the American dream before I could turn around and begin to ask myself, what do I believe? And now I really believe that, of course, this country is incredible and gives you a unique opportunity to mobilize yourself out of the class that you were born into. But I also think that's only half the American dream. I think another part of it is I have my ambition, I dream the dreams that I do, and then there has to be some social support to meet me on the other side of my dream. And those two things really complete it. So for me today, I don't know if I can nail it in a phrase, but my sense of my American dream in my heart is to be able to create some kind of a success for myself that generates a stable life where I can take care of a family. But then also, if I could add my own PS to the American dream, I don't believe it's success unless it creates opportunities for other people. So, one thing that seems sort of unfinished for me is that I've been encouraged in this country that is America to reach for my goals and dreams, and that should be the end of it. For me, now being able to have a home, no longer be homeless, to raise my son in New York City and not worry about food, I feel great for that. And now I have to live a life according to my own values that says, and now who else gets to go because I got this opportunity? To me, that's a whole picture of the American dream. Sure, yeah. There was a pivotal turning point in my life because as much as I could talk forever about community and people coming together, there is really something to be said about taking personal responsibility. There is something to be said for that, as much as that is demonized. Again, I believe it's both. In my own life, I had nowhere to live, and I was looking for a high school, and my dad was in a homeless shelter. My mom had just died, complications related to HIV/AIDS, and I was 16, and I wanted to go back to school. I was about to turn 17, had never been to school. I started knocking on the doors of all these alternative high schools looking for someone who would take me at my age, and I got a lot of doors slammed in my face, and I almost gave up. There was this one afternoon I was standing in Midtown Manhattan, and I literally could have gone one way or the other. I go to the next interview, and I try again, or I just give up, take the train for an hour, go back to the Bronx where I'm from, save the little bit of money that I begged for change to have, and I go buy a slice of pizza, forget the interview. And I remember being so frustrated at having so many doors slammed in my face, and I wasn't going to go. And I stood there, pizza or interview, and pizza or interview, and teetering between those two choices. I remember thinking at the time of my mother and how recently she had passed away and how much she loved me and how much I loved her. And there was something so grounding about that love. And the fact that I lost her woke me up to a type of urgency. And, you know, I kept telling myself before she passed away that I would do everything later. I'll get a job later, I'll go to school later. Everything was later, like pressing the snooze button on my life. And there I stood on that corner trying to make this decision, and I told myself, oh, I'll go back to school later. And an alarm bell went off. And I realized that my mother had been homeless at my age, living in New York City. Her mother had been mentally ill and sick and in unstable housing, and so on and so on. Somebody had to break the cycle. And if not now, then when? And I ditched the pizza. I went for the interview. And I told myself that even though it wasn't likely, at the very least it was possible that the school would take me. And when later on it came to applying to Harvard, I was a mess and coming from the streets, had never been to school, but I had 2 years of good grades. Should I apply to Harvard? It was unlikely, but I remember just feeling that love of thinking, well, it's possible. And being able to just live inside that possibility and push forward really began at that pivotal moment of the pizza or the interview. And now I find that really, as much as people like to try to tell you what they know is possible and not possible, no one knows what's possible until they're already doing it. You have to be in action to find out. Everything else is paralysis by analysis. So I believe when the rubber hits the road, that's how you know what's possible in your life.
There's about a few more minutes of this. Is that not powerful or what? I mean, wouldn't your kids, your high school folks seeing this? John had a recommendation that I'd like to close with, and that's to get a couple of people to just shout out with the microphone, of course, if there's a takeaway that you got from learning today, what it might be. So John, I'm starting with you.
I didn't know anything about NACI. And so it's interesting, though, that the bridge and what we do at the COC and trying to get into the school system, you guys were working the other side, getting towards us. So to me, that's my big takeaway.
I think one of the biggest takeaways is actually probably what you just said, the paralysis by analysis. I'm in an 8-county COC, and I've been planning in my head over the last years, how are we going to get our 8 counties to work together? How is that going to work? And I'm not doing anything. So here I sat in the room with 4 of our 8 counties today, and things have happened just by talking and making that connection. So just doing instead of overthinking.
Awesome.
I think just knowing that there are other partnerships that are working, there are other counties that are involved and want to be involved. We just have to go and look for, and just like Stephanie said, it's kind of difficult, we think, to get out there, but we've got to just try and just open those doors, push them open if we have to.
Great.
I think the most important thing that I learned today is by working together that it is possible that we can achieve the goals that we want to do to try to help the children. The most important thing are the children. We can't change the mindset of the parents.
what I took away is, or what I will take away is finding out, the new laws, whatever, for the unaccompanied youth, that they will be able to get their own food stamps and Medicare.
That's a big one.
She actually took what I was going to say too, but no, I was not aware at all of, those are some great changes that will help everyone.
This is sort of crazy because something that I took away was something that wasn't mentioned. That I realize is missing, and that is some educational budget and how to handle money. I believe in teaching a man to fish, and as we're going around talking about all these things, and I'm trying to think, how do you walk away from this rather than keep needing more and more and more? And we've got to do something somewhere along the line to stop all the give, which is wonderful when needed, but at some point, when do we learn to manage our money and understand what it takes to move forward on your own and have that accomplishment of I've done this on my own, rather than who all's handing me new stuff.
Right.
So that's sort of crazy, isn't it?
No, it's the long view. We don't want them to be dependent. We need the long view. So that's good, Gina. Thank you.
So my takeaway is I hope we do this again, and maybe if we meet in Tallahassee, we might get more attendance from that end of the spectrum. I don't know. There are folks missing today, so.
I've very much enjoyed this, meeting everybody and networking with everybody and finding lots of new ideas from all the things that we wrote up here. That was a huge help to me.
I think I'm just glad to see that these children are being identified and that it's a priority to the government, to the school districts, and to everybody else. And I'm glad we're looking for some resources to better their lives.
Everything I heard today was a learning experience for me, and there can't be anyone in the room who learned more than I did today. But and I can't tell you how glad I am that we met, and looking forward to another meeting. And like someone else said, if we had to, move around so that others could attend, I would certainly be glad to drive. I didn't drive very far today. I'd be glad to drive further another time. But just glad to make some contacts and hear some things that I didn't know, and feel a little more inadequate. Because that's the truth. Every time you go to a meeting like this, you're like, oh, I'm not doing that, or I didn't do that right, or I want. But that feeling of inadequacy is what makes you go back and do your job right. So
you'll get it.
Yeah.
My takeaway list will be too exhaustive to list, but just the networking, the collaboration, putting names to faces, and I got a list of going back, do this, follow up on this. So it's just a good session. And I'm looking forward to the next one. I just hope it's not too far down the road.
All right.
I mean in time-wise, not travel-wise.
I think with the strategies and the barriers, getting together with all the counties and stuff and seeing we all have the same problems and seeing some solutions that other counties have that we could incorporate, and it was very good, very enjoyable, learned a lot.
Dr. Barber, what is yours? What's your takeaway?
What is my takeaway? Well, I'm always humbled by the hearts of people who come together to do this work. It just always, and here it is, almost 3:15, and you guys are still here. When John said, "Hey, let's get their takeaway," I'm like, "Oh Lord, it's after 3 o'clock. They might all get up and leave." So my takeaway is always that I'm just amazed that we all come together and we all want to do what's right for kids. And when it's 3:10 and we still have a 2-hour drive, we're willing to stay.